Glory in Navori, the expansion that has set every corner of LoR Twitter and Reddit on fire. Whether that's people thirsting over Set and Samir's washboards or losing their minds over rotation, there's more turbulence in the community than a flight into the Bermuda Triangle. And a lot of the professional players with verifiable experience in other card games seem to mutually agree that rotation is good for the game. And as someone who personally hit Masters for the first time ever last season, we'll see. But as far as new cards go, though, this expansion might have unintentionally released the most powerful deck combo known to man. Even better, all of the cards are legal in the standard playlist. The deck I'm talking about, of course, is Jack Udyr, aka Bare Knuckle Brawling. Okay, I lied, but it makes for a good title, right? I was made simultaneously aware of this list by two people. First, by Rock Saint on Runeterra AR, a name that I recognize from making the most reasonably unhinged decks known to mankind. I saw the deck list, I saw the username, and thought nothing of it. A few minutes later, though, I opened Discord, and on one of my servers, the user Merc Mistro was ranting and raving about the efficacy of their homebrew, Jack Udyr. Now, both of these people had slightly different approaches to their deck building, so I adjusted some cards to my liking from both and landed on this mix specifically. It's actually a pretty straightforward list. We use the new units from Bilgewater to stabilize in the early game, then use Freljord's wealth of combat tricks to beef our units up to become these heavyweight hitters in the late game. Sure, a lot of our units are 1 HP, but there's no more Vile Feast in Standard. Thank you, rotation. I love you, LoR devs. I may be ace, but for this occasion, I might make an exception. Except you removed Unyielding Spirits and Troll Chin. I've decided the rotation is the worst thing ever because it broke into my home, ate all of my pizza rolls, and shot my dog. Following the season reset, I find myself in Platinum once again, and this is where our journey begins. Also, you should check out my other channel, A Shiny Sylveon, where I upload LoR commentaries around once or twice a week. Match number 1 was against Deep, something which we in the business call a foregone conclusion. Back in the day, the main counter that I had Deep were those classic TF Nami lists, since Deep had genuine difficulty dealing with Y elusive boards, and even more so now without Vile Feast. However, any deck that needs to take time to set up will be devoured by the extremely short timer that Deep sets itself on. And needless to say, I didn't expect this to go well at all, and my expectations were further confirmed by 2 Dreg Dredgers. I tried to fight back by removing a Sea Scarab later down the line, though it really only delayed the inevitable. They also had 2 copies of Undergrowth available, which I blocked twice with 2 copies of Inner Beasts. And additionally, my opponent attempted to remove my units twice with the Devourer, but funny enough, I also had 2 copies of 3 Sisters to prevent the removal from happening. The game itself was set in the Matrix, but I, unfortunately, was not the one, as my opponent held up exactly 6 mana for Vengeance on one turn, before dropping Nautilus the next, forcing me to surrender. Game number 2 was against Jack Akshan, an early idea that I had for the Bilgewater champion, but one that I had never been willing to practice. They had Akshan on 2, sure, and Brash is a good keyword in a lot of these situations, sure, but as the rounds progressed, I started to feel like my opponent was helping me out more than themselves. In one round, we traded Jack, something that worked way more in my favor than theirs, and after I had Udyr on my board, my opponent used Prize Fight on him, which discounted the stance back to 0. Thanks, I guess? My Jack leveled a few rounds later, giving more of an overwhelm threat on board, and then there was this attack turn where I was given a ton of damage for free. Excuse me, a lot of coins. Oh, that's a mistake. Greedy players. And finally, in this perfect consummate match that showed off basically every single strength that the deck had, I played the little shark lad and his friends to rally for the first victory of the video. But if match number 2 was a breeze because I felt confident in the list I was running, then the third one was a game where I had to adopt the true AM Shard player mantra. If they have it, they have it. And I'm of course talking about my unfortunate run-in with Spooky Rise, or just Rise with Shadow Isles. My experiences last season had left me emotionally damaged from seeing Megamind's cousin in my matches, and Shadow Isles was an exceptionally scary inclusion. The problem with this deck is that it is so vulnerable to unit removal. We like to go tall and have basically 0 protection for when any number of answers come through outside of going just a little bit taller. I was even more irritated by the fact that, including the deep game from earlier, this was the second match where my opponent had Quietus, which also ruins a lot of the strategy that I have here. I dropped Piltover and Castaway. Quietus. I dropped Combat Cook. Quietus. I had a leveled Jack on board with a weapon from another Combat Cook. Quietus. Dang, that's crazy, Rise, but if you look over here, I have something called Retribution. Now parry this, you casual. I don't know what it was about an unremarkable Thursday night that I recorded this background footage on, but we ran into another Jack Brute in game number 4, and this time with Vayne. Why are you tainting the wholesome shark lad with the blight that is Demacia? Have you no shame? I might have been playing tilted, because this region makes my brain turn off, but I relieved Jack of his misery by cruising my way to a resounding victory. Match 5 was against Deep again, and this time I actually had hope because for the first time in ages, my opponent didn't have Dreg Dredgers on turn 1. I mean, this was it. This was my opportunity. I'm swinging for big damage numbers there, there's no Sea Scarab on my opponent's side of the board, and what's this? A Shipwreck Hoarder? Without tossing abilities, you'll never find that Okay, you know what? This is fine. They only get 5 cards, and they could be literally anything. Alright, well, I have a second Jack into Ram stance that gets me lethal here every time. You know, sometimes you just can't win against the main character of LoR. My next opponent was playing Caitlyn Teemo, a very strange match overall. They were playing in such a way that had them playing for all the value, and I honestly couldn't blame them. My interaction is basically limited to 3 Sisters, Unforgiving Cold, Stances, and Prize Fight, all of which aren't exactly hard removal. And yet somehow, through some stroke of pure luck, I did end up out-trading my opponent pretty frequently. The pressure I was allowed to pile on, combined with a few well-placed ram stances, made sure that their valuable units never stayed intact for very long, and well, the victory screen sure is sweet to see once again. Especially when that screen is the one that precedes Gwen Quinn. Look, I understand that you're trying to target set Karma, and don't worry, that deck has ruined many recordings for me, but I'm past being sympathetic. I figured my chances went from bad to worse as I started with the objectively worst hand that I had seen from this deck in a while, eventually forcing me to play Knuckle early in the match to block the Redeemed Prodigy. I also had this brilliant hit from Coral Creatures. I hit this card. I'm sorry, I'm dying. I hit this card every single time off of Coral Creatures and Wiggly. Why? Every single time. And yet despite all of this, I held on for a surprising amount of time. I chalked my change in fortune up to my opponent never having Opulent Foyer on board, which is a card that I'm surprised to still see in Standard, and Unforgiving Cold, my beloved. I was particularly proud of my defenses on round 7, leveled Jack thanks to Bloodbait, strangely enough, and clapped back for an extremely satisfying victory on turn 8. This was a relatively fast result, all things considered, but the cards that I drew happened to be just barely enough for me to stave off defeat until I could ramp up to my own victory. Did my opponent misplay? Sure, I guess, but all that matters now is that the number here goes up. The number will not stay up though in the next game, Pantheon Vayne. Out of all of the Demacia decks that I've faced so far though, this was the one that I was kind of okay with losing to. Pantheon invites people to play very linear combo type decks, which Demacia excels at, but this also means that a lot of its interplay has to do with when they're allowed to use buffs. And I also simply got outplayed, not by Demacia cards, but by the power of Targon. Cosmic Youngling was a great turn 2 answer to my Pocket Pickers, a card which I was curious to see what use cases it had after Soraka got rotated out of Standard, and I walked my Jack directly into a Hammer of Dawn, aka Sunburst. But then there's the Demacia side of things and how much I hate Vayne. Now, here I misplayed by thinking that Pantheon was the win condition. My idea was that if Vayne didn't have the finisher champion to swing with, then her ability to create a free rally token would be wasted against the plethora of keywords and stats that I had at my disposal. But the decision to not remove her here though was my downfall, and after Pantheon inevitably leveled, who else but Vayne was there to facilitate my defeat through the free attack tokens that she generates. Nothing against the player, but I hope you lose to Ash LeBlanc later. And this match went so poorly for me that I swapped out Knuckle for 2 copies of Frostcoat Cub. For those of you who don't know what the card is, Frostcoat Cub is a 2/3 unit that can block pretty well in the early game. It is a decent target for Barnacles, and since a lot of our damage comes from sticking Overwhelm, I can take one turn to play Frostcoat Mother and push for lethal by stacking more stats on top of there. Sure, Knuckle is in the list because of how it synergizes with Jack's level up, but quite often I found myself having this 2-mana brick in my hand. In a lot of situations, I didn't have the ideal use case scenario for the coin to play the 3-card combo, and in the one game earlier when we did win with the rally, I was already in such a heavy winning position that a chunky Overwhelm unit would have given me the same results anyway. Now there might be some argument here for Ruthless Raider as well, but I like the dog because of its greater blocking capability, its better late game use, and look at how frickin' cute it is. I only played 2 more matches to round things out at a nice 10, and I did manage to use the dog in the first one that I played. Number 9 was, get this, another Jack list, and this time with Nami and Piltover and Zaun. This was my fastest match of the evening. My adversary played Coral Creatures into the jailbreak that they received from the card. Naturally, my opponents don't hit Blood Bait like I do, and they get the Shadow Fiend for a free 4 damage. I hit back with 4 damage of my own, fully anticipating a Mystic Shot or a High Note to take my Castaway down, but I received no such gifts. They somehow had nothing in hand to play, never banked their spell mana for Nami level even though they played Formula and hopped right over that requirement, and pulled the classic top right bottom left maneuver after Station Archivist found literally nothing for them to play. This match took less than 5 minutes. And yet the final boss that I faced shortly thereafter took 5 years off of my life. I mean, you see this match and champion lineup, right? Ratty is here, bringing a classic archetype back to the game after several seasons in the shadows. And after all, Shroom decks are really good at punishing greedy control lists, something that we've seen from Set, Karma, and Seraphine Jack. We're just here for a good old time, for a good old time's sake. Alright, we need to move, and fast. I was very fortunate to find the scout weapon on turn 3 and took a decent chunk out of Rady's health bar because of it, knocking them down to 10 HP. They responded with their own development of 2 Puffcat Peddlers and a Starlit Seer in the next few turns that followed, and that lack of interaction that I had was really starting to hurt me now. Turn number 7 was particularly indicative of just how powerless I was to stop them. A Harsh Winds followed by a Brittle Steel took all of the power out of this attack and generated some problematic effects for me. I still managed to level Udyr and got his stats high enough to trade anything buffed by the Seer, but was it all too late? It all came down to turn number 9. I played the upcycled Raycon to Udyr to get a scout attack in, knocking Rady's Nexus down to 3. They had Insider Knowledge to draw 2 cards, taking my health in that turn from a healthy 12 to a measly 4, well within the striking range of this deck. Fortunately, I knew my next attack was lethal, so long as... I mean, sure, my Overwhelm wins me the game, but was it truly enough? Was there a point where I misplayed along the way and could have pushed for more damage? I mean, there are 43 mushrooms in my deck, 23 cards, and not a drop of healing for my Nexus. Mathematically, this never works out.
They had a great hand. They had the exact cards they needed to win it. Oh. That was not good for my heart.
Woo!
That was not good for my heart.
You know, I like to think of that game's result as recompense for the deep game earlier. After 10 matches, Bare Knuckle Brawling went surprisingly positive considering stats that say otherwise. I won 7 games, a few of which I had no right winning, and lost 3. I definitely didn't face up against the most meta-defining lists in the game, but once I reach Masters again this season, it's not like anybody's going to be splitting hairs about the results I received, the journey that it took, to get there. All that I know is that because this deck has a 70% win rate, it's definitely meta, and you should all try it and queue against me. That would be so hilarious. Thanks for watching. That's all I have for this video. In the meantime, I will let you all know that it might be a while again before I come back here, as I'm working on the biggest video essay that I've ever written, and that'll be coming out when I'm done with it. In the meantime, I hope you enjoyed the content. Safe travels, and goodbye.